Every now and then, a car comes along in the automotive world that stops time, redefines conventions, and alters the automotive timeline forever. When you really think about it, a few car models come to mind, like the Morris Mini Minor. You might remember the Mini of the 1960s because of its front-wheel drive layout and transverse engine arrangement that saved space and provided more room for passengers and luggage, influencing a generation of car makers and engineers forever. There's also the Citroën 2CV for those of you who were alive in 1948 when it was released. You may remember the paired-back design that gave the car its charm, with which it evoked a cult-like following during its 42 years of production. What about the Fiat 500? The Italian beauty ruled the highways for decades because of its unforgettable body shape, nimble handling, and fuel efficiency that positioned it as the darling of the people. One thing is common for all of these cars. Once they showed up in the automotive world, nothing ever remained the same. They were game changers, trailblazers, and of course, money makers. This is the league to which the Toyota RAV4 belonged. The year is 1994, and while the Western world was munching popcorn to Pulp Fiction and dancing to Wigfield and Britpop, history was being made across the other side of the world in Japan. The famous Japanese car maker Toyota was about to make a debut in a segment of the car market that had been struggling for a breath of fresh air, the SUV market. If you weren't around at the time, or were not much of a gearhead in the early 90s, you wouldn't properly understand the mess that the SUV market was in at the time. So let's paint a picture for you. Suzuki had just rolled out the X90 in an attempt to diversify and change the SUV game. This was after its initial SUV offering, the Suzuki Samurai, fell on the sword of Consumer Reports magazine. Literally. The Samurai started well after its release in 1985, recording 8,000 units sold per month and about 47,000 units in the US. However, in June of 1998, the publisher of Consumer Reports magazine wrote that the SUV had a higher tendency to roll over than other SUVs and questioned its safety. As you can expect, this affected the sales of the car so much that in 1995, the SUV sold only 662 units. Suzuki would later sue the magazine in a $60 million libel suit and settle out of court years later. The simple summary is the Suzuki Samurai failed in the US, and the X90 was meant to be a response, or better still, steady the rocking ship for a while. For Suzuki, when it rains, it pours, and it was raining cats and dogs on this Japanese company, as things did not go according to plan. The X90, also known as the Suzuki Vitara, didn't enjoy a fraction of the initial success of its predecessor. Its woes started right from the jump, and it wasn't hard to see why. First off, the car was ugly. Yeah, we know all cars matter, and we shouldn't hurt their feelings, but there's no better way to say it. The X90 had an awful look. It looked like 3 card boxes were piled on top of each other, with a disproportionate length, which seemed to perfectly justify its tagline, "What are you staring at?" The PR team that chose the tagline must have taken a drive in the car and had seen people's reaction to the monstrosity that the car was before choosing that line. The X90 was an automobile Frankenstein, haphazardly combining the design of a hatchback, sports car, and an SUV. Apart from its awful look, its handling was also wonky and terrible, and coupled with cheaply made body parts that easily fell off, it seemed like Suzuki was on a mission to self-destruct, and with this car as the trigger button. Now, this was the state of the SUV market in the early 90s. While there were really good SUVs, such as the Land Rover Freelander and the Ford Explorer at the time, there was room for more improvement, and Toyota, being the automobile giant that it is, decided to bid for that room with the RAV4. This is the story of the RAV4 and how it shook the world, redefining the automotive world and the SUV market, to be specific. The story of the Toyota RAV4 started in 1986, when the company decided to take a bigger bite off the SUV market. The Land Cruiser, which was its first entrant into the SUV market, did very well, and its 40 Series model was even the company's best-selling model between 1961 and 1965. So there was enough motivation to have another go at the market, and this time, the plan was to change the playing field. Under the codename 153T, Toyota started the design and conceptualization of a car that would retain the look and feel of an SUV, which was a very popular vehicle type at the time, and also add extra features with regard to the build and performance of the vehicle. This gave birth to the idea of a crossover SUV. For anyone who is not really excited by the technicalities of vehicles, as long as you can drive and park, a crossover SUV is an SUV that uses a unibody construction as opposed to the body-on-frame construction that SUVs historically had. Now, don't get confused. It's pretty simple. You just need to understand the history of SUVs and how they were built before Toyota decided to bless the world with its ingenuity. Come along. History of SUVs. A proper account of how this Toyota SUV conquered the world will never be complete without a proper lowdown on the history of SUVs. More importantly, you wouldn't understand the extent of Toyota's brilliance if you didn't know how SUVs were built before the RAV4 came to the fore. The popular story is that SUVs were a byproduct of Jeeps after Willie Overland saw the impact of Jeeps in the Second World War and decided to extend the use of that vehicle to the general civilian populace. Many car experts and historians even credited a man called Brooks Stevens and his design of the 1946 Willie Overland station wagon as the prototype for what SUVs look like today. While all that stuff might be true, the real story started several years back in 1933. That year saw Chevrolet build the granddaddy of all SUVs, the Chevrolet Suburban Carryall. Ring a bell? Yes, the same Chevrolet Suburban that is known today as the Yukon. This SUV was built in 1933, which makes Chevrolet Suburban the oldest model name in the world. That is a vital history lesson for you. The Carryall, at the time, was built with wood and was not available to average drivers. It did exactly what its name implied, carry all passengers and their luggage to and from the train station, which is where the term station wagon came from. This vehicle was modified after 2 years and now used a metal body construction as well as more space for carrying up to 8 passengers and their luggage at the same time. It wasn't until 1940, during the Second World War, that the concept of Jeeps hit the road, and that is a spicy slice of history right there. Chevrolet had designed and built the second generation of Suburbans for military usage. The company even made some cosmetic touch-ups on the vehicle and added some technical components, like you do when your crush is visiting, all in a bid to build a befitting vehicle for the armed services. Sadly, the makeup and extra padding didn't work. The military told Chevrolet that the Suburban was too big and difficult to maneuver, especially in rough terrains, which wars are known for. In its words, the Army needed a, quote, tough, durable four-wheel drive that's capable of transporting soldiers over rough terrain. Chevrolet was burned, not literally. Bids were entertained from other car manufacturers, and this was how Jeeps came into play. Jeeps were used in the war, but in the aftermath of the war, car makers saw how Jeeps could be modified for civilian use and went to work. With Jeep's framework available for them, these companies proceeded to make several vehicles that defined the SUV model and set the foundation for the genius success of the Toyota RAV4. These vehicles include the 1944 civilian Jeep. This vehicle is what is now known today as the Jeep Wrangler. In 1944, when it was first released to the public, it was a retail version of the military Jeeps used during the Second World War and was built by Willie Overland. Remember him? The vehicle, codenamed the CJ, a short form of civilian Jeep, would later go through 7 different modifications from 1944 to 1987, with very little upgrade in appearance and functionality before it was changed to the Jeep Wrangler. The 1946 Willys Jeep station wagon. Remember the station wagon we mentioned earlier, the one built by Brooks Stevens? It also belongs on the Mount Rushmore of SUVs. In fact, it made history as the first SUV to provide 4-wheel drive for drivers in remote areas and wintry conditions. The vehicle was one of the most successful offerings by Willys, as about 300,000 units were built and sold after the Second World War. The 1948 Land Rover series. Across the ocean in the UK, 2 British brothers, Maurice and Spencer Wilkes, saw the civilian adaptation of the military Jeep vehicles by American car makers and were inspired to do something similar in their locality. The two were higher-ups at the Rover Motor Company at the time and had acquired a spare military vehicle that they drove to their farm. Using the inspiration from the CJ vehicle, the brothers went to work and came out with the Land Rover Series 1. The Land Rover was mostly used as a 4-wheel drive farm and utility vehicle, which is not surprising, given that its inspiration came from men who drove a military Jeep to their own farm. The 1953 International Harvester Travelall. During the Second World War, many American engineering companies, especially those that manufactured vehicular engines, made some serious money. This was because they were involved in production contracts with governments looking to provide supplies for their armies. From Ford to Boeing, and even Lockheed Aircraft Corporation, these companies blew up and expanded their operations from the profits made during the war. One of these companies was International Harvester. As you might have deduced from its name, this U.S. company focused mainly on the production of farming machinery. After getting the profit from the Second World War contracts, International Harvester decided to venture into the production of vehicles and joined the brewing SUV bandwagon with its IH Travelall. Like the last vehicle, the International Harvester Travelall was inspired by a much older vehicle, the legendary Chevrolet Suburban Carryall. Up until 1952, the manufacturer made its station wagons with wooden bodies. Does that remind you of any SUV at all? Yes, the granddad that happened to inspire the IH Travelall launched in 1933. By 1952, a new R line of pickups was born, and IH switched to a full steel-bodied approach for the Travelall. By 1956, IH tried to wrestle some sales from Jeep and decided to add the 4-wheel drive feature to its vehicle. The 1954 Toyota Land Cruiser. Before the RAV4, Toyota had already etched its name in SUV history. Like most SUVs at the time, its 1954 Land Cruiser was inspired by the Willys civilian Jeep. The first set of Land Cruisers were the 2-door models that were popularly used by the police and forest workers. 4 years later, Toyota built a hardtop model and began selling this model in North America. And by 1960, Toyota had released the legendary 40 series that went on to make history as the company's best-selling model between 1961 and 1965. The 1961 International Harvester Scout. With the success of the IH Travelall, International Harvester was encouraged to give CJ, which was the leading SUV at the time, a run for its money. The result of this decision is the IH Scout, and it became an instant success. Up until 1966, when Ford decided to enter the SUV market with its Bronco model, the big three in the SUV market were the CJ, the Toyota Land Cruiser, and the IH Scout. The 1961 Scout continued to make waves in the market till it was retired in 1980, when the fortunes of International Harvester started to plummet. The 1963 Jeep Wagoneer. The term luxury has come a long way. If you lived in 1963, the idea and definition of luxury might seem very different to you. A luxury SUV at that time only needed to have an automatic transmission, feature an overhead cam 6-cylinder inline engine — wonder who uses that these days — and to be fitted with power brakes and air conditioning to stand out. This was the story of the 1963 Jeep Wagoneer, aka the Super Wagoneer, aka the first ever luxury SUV. Designed to replace the Jeep station wagon, the Super Wagoneer set the tone and template for SUVs today, and is the reason why most SUVs from 1963 featured 4-wheel drive, lots of cargo space, and a suite of comfort and luxury features. It was also the first SUV model that offered an independent front suspension, allowing for a better driving experience and ride comfort. The 1969 Chevrolet K5 Blazer. After the domination of the Big Three — CJ, Toyota Land Cruiser, and IH Scout — in the 1950s, the Ford Bronco and the Jeep CJ were the dominating names in the 1960s SUV market. To compete favorably against these two, Chevrolet had to build an SUV that met the standards of the dominating names and also had a cherry on top. Enter the Chevrolet K5 Blazer. This SUV followed the two-door design of its competitors, but was made bigger and with more luxury. Read that as more cargo space and air conditioning. With these features, the K5 Blazer made an entry into the top ranks and forced other manufacturers to make tweaks to their SUVs. If you can't beat them, friggin' join them! Because of the K5 Blazer, Dodge had to introduce its full-size Ramcharger in 1974, while Ford moved its 1978 Bronco onto a bigger chassis. The 1984 Jeep Cherokee. If you ask many historians in the automobile sector, they refer to the 1990 Ford Explorer as the trigger for the modern SUV craze that Toyota banked on. This is not entirely true. Before the Ford Explorer came in 1990, the Jeep Cherokee, released 6 years prior, did a great job of setting the tone for modern SUV designs and features. The Jeep Cherokee was the first car-like utility vehicle. Its mid-size made it the first Jeep with a truck-like ladder-boxed chassis with a car-like monocoque unit. It reduced the need for larger cars like the Bronco and Blazer, making a case for more space efficiency rather than large sizes. More importantly, it didn't only introduce the 4-door designs for SUVs, forcing other manufacturers such as Nissan, Toyota, and General Motors to add 4 doors to their SUV offerings, but it also inspired the 4-door design in the 1990 Ford Explorer. Now, given the genealogy of SUVs, their designs, build, and performance, you might expect the Toyota RAV4 to follow in the footsteps of its predecessors and maintain the status quo. Well, sorry to burst that bubble. Toyota, with its RAV4 concept, opted to reinvent the wheel, literally. The RAV4 took the popular design of the SUVs available at the time, added a sprinkle of its own brilliance — more on that later — and made a vehicle that was unique and yet similar, such that other brands dared not compete with, but only fell in line. The company reinvented the SUV and made it really cool to drive, and here's how. All the vehicles that made a mark in the history of SUVs used a body-to-frame construction. This means that the vehicle's body was built separately on the chassis that carries the powertrain. In simpler terms, the former SUVs had 2 parts, the body of the vehicle and the chassis, instead of being built as a single unit. Now, you can't blame the manufacturers at the time. Body-to-frame constructions come with lots of benefits which they couldn't close their eyes to. It was a cheaper way to build cars, it made SUVs better off-road vehicles, it increased all the hauling and towing capabilities of these vehicles, and many more. In fact, the body-to-frame construction allows the cars to make less road noise. That's how useful the option was. But despite these advantages, it had grave consequences. The crash effects were severe, as it gave no room for crumple zones. Its fuel economy was terrible, and it made SUVs heavier. All of these things made the SUVs somewhat of a problem to drive. As you might wonder, if they were so bad, why were SUVs popular at the time? Well, the answer is simple. SUVs were not really a thing on city roads. They were mostly used as off-road vehicles at the time, which made them not cool to drive. This was the situation for SUV drivers and engineers at the time, before the RAV4 cruised its way up to the scene. With its unibody construction method, Toyota built an SUV that had better fuel economy, offered a smoother ride experience, and was less heavy. Basically, this SUV ditched the inherent downsides of being an SUV and retained its benefits. To build the vehicle, Toyota engineers didn't go with new SUV parts. Rather, they raided every single line in the Toyota car division and used the parts they could find to build a new SUV. So, the chassis came from a Corolla, the drivetrain came from a Camry, and the suspensions and transmission came off a Celica GT4. And thus, the recreational active vehicle four-wheel drive was born. The first Toyota RAV4 was released for sale in 1994 in Japan and 1995 in the US and Europe. This marked the beginning of the first generation of SUVs. The first generation of the RAV4 bore all the telltales of an off-road body, despite the effort by engineers to tone it down a bit from the design shown in the concept car. In the US, the first-gen RAV4 came with either a front-wheel drive or all-wheel drive, and a 2-liter 4-cylinder engine with the capacity to deliver up to 119 horsepower at the time. It was also paired with either a 4-speed automatic transmission or 5-speed manual transmission. All of these features may not sound like much to you now, but at the time, it was cutting-edge technology that even earned the RAV4 an award, the Automobile of the Year in 1997. With the brand slogan, "Manage the Dream," Toyota did a great job of managing the expectations of its customers in 1997 when it announced that the RAV4 would undergo some redesign and a few touch-ups for the 1998 model year. The redesigned version, which many customers referred to as the Toyota RAV4.1, came with the options of a soft and hardtop with 3 doors. Yes, that was a convertible right there, and an increase in horsepower from 119 to 127. In the same year, the Japanese company made another blockbusting move by making the Toyota RAV4 EV. Yes, Toyota made a friggin' 100% plug-in electric version of the RAV4 in the late 90s. Tesla, hold your hands up. The EV was Toyota's attempt to meet the state of California's zero-emissions policy at the time, and the EPA rated the EV as having 95 miles range per charge. This EV version of the RAV4 used a nickel hydride battery instead of the lithium-ion battery type that is popular with most EVs today, delivering a top speed of 80 miles per hour and a 0 to 60 mile per hour acceleration in 18 seconds. The battery took 5 hours to get fully charged. Again, all of these features may make the EV sound like a terrible idea today, but at the time it was a cutting-edge innovation. Also, these EVs were for business fleet leasing and not necessarily for individual purchase and use, just in case you were wondering why your rich cousin didn't get the EV that year. You also can't get it anymore because it was discontinued in 2003 after selling about 1,500 units. By the year 1999, the company pulled its hardtop 3-door versions off the US market and left the soft-top versions in a preparation bid for the debut of the second generation of RAV4s. The second generation of Toyota RAV4s debuted in 2000 for the 2001 model year. For the US market, the second-gen RAV4s came with 5 doors and no soft-top. As with its first generation, the new RAV4 came in 2 trim levels, the front-wheel drive and the all-wheel drive. The main difference between these trim levels is the engine power, as the front-wheel drive came with 120 horsepower, while the all-wheel drive came with 160 horsepower. Remember that we said there were no soft tops in that generation? Well, it was a simple case of sacrificing one to get many. The second generation RAV4 came with a diesel option and other cutting-edge technologies, for the time of course, like stability controls, anti-lock brakes, cruise control, and a height-adjustable driver's seat, which means that not-so-tall people have this SUV to thank for the ability to see the road while driving. Other cutting-edge technologies include a 6-speaker CD sound system, a bonnet scoop, heated mirrors, roof racks, and a mesh grille. You get the idea already. It came with technologies that you don't care for anymore, but at the time, they were a big deal. The third generation of the RAV4 was released in 2005 for the 2006 model year and lasted till 2012. The new generation featured a sedan-styled platform and a 3-door design, but the 3-door version was cancelled in 2007. This generation of RAV4s was also the first to offer the 3-row of seats arrangement, setting a pace for other SUVs. Depending on the trim levels you went for, your RAV4 at that time could either be fitted with a 2.4-liter inline-4 engine delivering 166 horsepower, or the 3.5-liter V6 engine delivering a monstrous 269 horsepower. In line with its tradition of improving on each and every generation of its vehicles, Toyota added sports suspension and interior comfort features such as leather upholstery, dual-zone automatic climate control, and a DVD entertainment system in the back of the SUV. The fourth generation of the RAV4, when unveiled at the 2012 Los Angeles Auto Show for the 2013 model year, proved to be a complete redesign of the previous models. Toyota removed the spare wheel at the rear door, and the rear door itself was not side-opening anymore, but rather a rear liftgate. It also discarded the V6 engines used in the previous generations in favor of the inline 4-cylinder engines, providing 176 horsepower. What's a RAV4 without cutting-edge technologies? This generation of RAV4s featured more technologies, such as the Toyota Safety Sense, which is a driver assistance system, and in-tune infotainment systems. The fifth and latest generation of the Toyota RAV4 was first unveiled at the December 2017 LA Auto Show and later in March 2018 at the New York International Auto Show. Built by a team led by Yoshikazu Saiki, the new RAV4 continues the tradition of unibody construction, but this time with better details, as the new generation of RAV4 is 54% more rigid than the previous generations. It also uses a multi-link rear suspension that helps with ideal handling, lesser cabin noise, and an improved ride experience. The latest generation of the RAV4 has been in the market since 2018 and has been doing well, entrenching the reason why the Toyota RAV4 is considered one of the best SUVs ever made. Drivers and automotive freaks with a thing for SUVs now have a new name to thank for unbeatable and out-of-this-world driving performance, and this name is the Toyota RAV4. For more videos on your favorite vehicles, check out our other videos on our channel.